See you.
Yeah.
So, Quentin, let's talk a little bit. I want you to paint the picture for us of what it was like at Columbia before October 7th. I think it's helpful for us to hear a frame of reference.
I think before October 7th, I never really thought about, outside of Jewish spaces. I wasn't thinking about, can I wear a yarmulke on campus? If I have my Magen David out, am I making a statement? It was in the back of my head. The only thought I really had is when I'm not on campus, when I'm leaving campus. Before I go to Shabbat dinner, I go to Shabbat services every Friday, and in doing so, I'm always wearing my yarmulke. And it's when I leave the gates to Columbia, we're in Morningside Heights, we're in the Upper West Side, then I'm, a little bit more cognizant of my surroundings, but it was always outside of Columbia, never inside Columbia.
And so when you're saying before October 7th, there was really no worry about wearing your kippah on campus, and I'm guessing now after October 7th there is?
Yeah, it's more of an awareness, thinking about what's going on, especially in the past month and a half, as tensions have risen. Thinking about, we had the encampment, there was a hall that was occupied, it was Hamilton Hall, and that was really the climax of being aware. And I have a few stories I can talk about, some of my friends' experiences that were really hostile to Jewish students and really changed the climate on campus.
Tell me, when we were talking on the phone and catching up, you told me about some things that happened on October 8th, after the October 7th attack. Can you describe those for us?
Yeah, so learning about October 7th, as more and more information was coming out, the community was mourning. We were not sure what happened, and as we learned more and more of the atrocities, we were especially upset that there was one professor in particular, Joseph Mossad, who was sharing rhetoric that was nearly celebratory. It said the awesome events. He was making reference to instead of having an air force, they had it was motorized gliders, the paragliders. Yeah. And then, there were multiple mourning type events that were going on in moments of silence. And the first real protest that Columbia took a significant step is on October 12th, when they closed campus to all the affiliates. Typically, Columbia is in the heart of Manhattan, but anyone can come onto campus. So what they did was they closed it. They said only if you're a student, if you're an affiliate, if you're a professor, a TA, a course assistant, then you can get onto campus. So what happened was I was walking through campus, and I was going to the rally. On campus, you have... This
is a rally in support of Israel?
So it was two things. On October 12th, you had a pro-Palestinian rally on one side of the quad, and then on the other side, you had a somber, mourning. It was about 5-10 minutes of silence, and then it was singing Hatikvah, it was singing prayers of, songs of remembrance and mourning. And then we had about 5 helicopters above, and then the press were there.
And this pro-Palestinian rally, this was supporting what happened? Or, you really, help me understand what was happening in the protests in the early days. Was it, like you said, there was a professor who was praising what Hamas did?
So he was sharing his awe that they were so successful, and he was really relishing in that this, Israel's military, seen as one of the strongest in the world, and they're so high tech that they were able to be, defeated to such a degree. I'll share some of the quotes that this rally, it was some of the first times I was hearing it, and unfortunately has been normalized to a large degree. So I have some of them with me. So some of the quotes were, especially later on, but it was condemning Israel. It was saying, burn Tel Aviv to the ground. It was saying, go back to Poland. It was a globalized intifada from New York to Gaza. And I was especially alarmed to hear those things on our campus.
And these were clearly students?
Yes, these were students. Then also outside of the Columbia gates, more recently, there were some that were saying, we want October 7th, again and again, thousands of times over, calling for repeated attacks against Israel.
So outside the gates were not students, in other words?
They could have been students, but it was a mix of outside the gates and then also inside the gates.
And was there was one professor or more, or several professors who were participating in this way?
So on October 8th, there was one professor who wrote that, and he shared that article, but it's been a lot of professors kind of jumping forward who have been really upset at how the police have been called onto campus. So for a bit more context, there was an encampment that was started on April 17th. April 17th is notable because on April 17th, the president of Colombia, Manouche Shafik, and some other top administration officials were invited. I don't know if they're invited or they told that they needed to go testify in front of Congress. And you had, I think it was the Department of, it was the Committee of Workforce and Education Committee, and they were essentially acknowledging that there's an anti-Semitism problem at Columbia. And I think it was really intentional that they started the encampment on that day to almost take away from the conversation of Columbia admitting that they have an issue with addressing anti-Semitism on campus.
Mm-hmm. And what was the tenor of this encampment? I mean, was it just sitting quietly in protest, or was it spewing anti-Semitic hate? I mean, I want you to flesh out as many details and provide us with as much context and information, because you were there, mm-hmm. and I'm only reading about it. And I don't know if I'm reading just snippets or if I'm reading an accurate description of what it was like on a day-to-day basis.
So immediately the encampment was about 60 tents that they snuck on at about 4 in the morning. And at first we're just really surprised. What's going on here? Do they get lost? But it seemed to be the same quotes. Palestine will be free. Resistance is justified by any means type thing. From the river to the sea, calling for the destruction of Israel. So it was a lot of the same rhetoric, but it wasn't necessarily different from what we've heard previously.
And so have you feel afraid now walking through campus?
And typically there was one turning point that happened a week into the encampment where a friend that was assaulted and others that had some death threats, and there were people following them around.
A friend was physically assaulted.
Yeah, so what was happening was he was leaving by the encampment. There was a big sundial, and there was about 20 students there, and they had Israeli flags, they had American flags, and they were playing Matisyahu and different, Israeli music.
Right.
And as they were leaving, they grabbed his Israeli flag, tried to burn it, and then he was walking there trying to get it, and throwing water on him, and they threw something, it was a rock or whatever it was at him.
And he was injured?
I don't think he was seriously injured. I think it hit his face, but he was all right the next day.
And you said, and friends have received death threats?
Yeah, so this was all in the same night where I think tensions were especially high, where there were a group of people, they're all their masks, their faces are all covered with keffiyehs, and they're yelling, go kill yourself, we're going to kill you, the types of comments.
And when did the campus actually get closed?
So the campus was only officially closed to all students once they occupied Hamilton Hall. Hamilton Hall is a building on campus. I have 2 classes there, most people have classes there. And they broke into it. There were 2 janitors working. One of the janitors, there was a bit of a scuffle, and he was able to get out after, I think, 30, 40 minutes.
And so they closed the campus. What has this meant to you as a student? I mean, you finished your junior year.
Yeah.
So how did you take finals? How did you go to the library? I mean, how was your schedule adjusted and so forth?
So closing campus effectively meant no one was allowed onto campus unless you're in one of the 5 or 6 residence halls that is directly on campus. So that meant you couldn't go to the library, you couldn't go to the dining hall, you couldn't go to any academic buildings if you were doing research. Everything was completely shut. Before that, they moved to remote classes or hybrid classes. There was a rabbi who said, Jewish students clearly aren't safe at Columbia's campus. We had the Chabad rabbi, and the Chabad rabbi on this night when my friends were assaulted, the others received death threats, he was escorting students home. And when he was doing so, there were people following him saying, "Go back to Poland. We don't want you here," type rhetoric. And I think it was justified at the time of saying you shouldn't come back to campus. A lot of students left for Passover, especially Orthodox students, and they didn't come back. They either didn't come back till they needed to move out. I have a friend and their parent flew in to move them out, so they didn't have to go back to campus.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so, how did you finish your junior year? I mean, how did you take your finals and finish your? I mean, what happened to your classes and your grades? You're doing all right, right? So I'm very concerned about my students here.
So they implemented a policy where most of your grades couldn't hurt you for the final exams. That was nice. Unfortunately, I think at least for most of my friends and students, you weren't able to focus. It was a continual state of unknown. It was knowing, will this exam count? Will I be penalized? Thinking about everything going on. There was a lot of people were nervous about, there was the police coming onto campus, just not knowing, were we safe on campus? I was out and about on campus, and then we received a shelter-in-place order, and they had effectively like a SWAT team come in. I think they had maybe 100 or so police officers, it could have been more, and they were able to storm and remove all of the people that were occupying Hamilton Hall. But after that, there was a state of uneasiness, of not knowing what was going to happen next. And
so you told me on the phone, we were talking this week, that you didn't know if you should take your finals and seriously or not. Like you were sort of like, what should I do? Do I do this 100% or not? So how did you ultimately decide?
Ultimately, I spent most of my time doing one final, and then I didn't do any of the other finals because I already had grades I was happy with from early on in the semester.
It's just mind-boggling that these are the questions that you're dealing with, and that you have to think about on the fly. So what do you think the school did right, and what do you think the school did wrong in handling this?
I think the school did two things really well. We're more on the other side. But I think they acknowledged that being in New York or being at a large university, you're going to have a lot of outsiders that are going to look to stir the pot. I think they've coined the term professional protesters. And by trying to close campus off, I think that cooled things down to a degree that still is really hot, but I think it could have been fairly worse. I think the other thing that they did a really good job is acknowledging that there are a lot of students that were really uncomfortable on Columbia's campus, and they formed an anti-Semitism task force. The goal of the anti-Semitism task force was to try and understand what are students bothered by, what's going on campus. So they organized a bunch of listening sessions. The task force was appointed by the president. They had about, I think, 5 or 6 members, mostly Jewish faculty and a few non-Jewish faculty. And they held a listening session and listening session and listening session. And then they advised to the president, Shafiq, and they released a report. The first report I think it came out in mid-March, and it looked at free speech. How can we facilitate ways to protest on campus that are safe?
Have you heard things that you would call legitimate protest?
Legitimate protest.
I mean, things that you say, oh, I don't agree, but I understand that point. And that seems legit.
I think I have within the Jewish community. I think the Jewish community is recognizing, we fully want to support Israel. We're supporting Israel, but we're not fully supporting necessarily all the actions of the Netanyahu government. I think holding space for that and recognizing that in the Jewish community, people do it all the time. I think that's wonderful. I think all too unfortunately, it's all or nothing. They're advocating for the complete destruction of Israel, and that's it. So that's not so much, but I'm not going to the protests and listening to everything in detail.
No, I said to you on the phone and reassured. I mean, you're an expert on your experience and what you have seen and heard at Columbia, and that's what I want you to speak about. So now, what do you think the administration or the school did wrong?
I think a big thing is they have yet to enforce their own policies. And when they have enforced their own policies, they've waited until it's got nearly out of control. So for example, they had this encampment, and instead of saying, whenever you want to organize any event on Columbia's campus, you need to organize like a waiver beforehand or get approval. You're not allowed to protest in certain areas. For example, you can't protest in the lobby of a building. However, you can do it on the main college walk of campus. So they got in trouble and they were suspended because they weren't protesting following the rules, and there were some changes to the rules, and then then they were warned multiple times, and nothing really happened. So I think that Columbia should really be enforcing the rules surrounding the correct ways to protest. So another example of this, they had the encampment, and they gave maybe 4 warnings, and at the 5th warning, then they called in the police the first time, and then the next day later, the encampment popped up next to the other lawn, and the encampment went on for, I think it was over a week, about maybe 2 weeks, And they continue to move the red line of saying, okay, if you're not out by this time, we're gonna suspend you, we're gonna kick you out, we're gonna call the police. It was only when they broke into Hamilton Hall, that's when a day later they were forced to call into the police. So I think the administration needs to be stricter, because I think a lot of the students think they're bluffing. They're not actually gonna call in the police, they're not gonna do anything.
Do you think calling in the police was the right move?
I think it was a really difficult move, because you never want to, put your students in harm.
The SWAT team seems rather strong, so I want to know your impression. I mean, that would be tough to see a SWAT team being called into your home, in a sense, to protect you.
Yeah, I think that the students, unfortunately, they were. I think it's really unfortunate it happened. I think it was totally necessary and justified to happen. I think there was ample warning. I think it's a clear escalation when you're breaking into a building, when you're holding a custodial worker hostage for a period of time. I think it was completely justified. And
you were in taking classes when some of this is going on. Was the professor able to concentrate? Were you able to concentrate? I mean, like in April, you're still going to classes while this tumult is going on outside.
So I had a class in Hamilton Hall, the building that was occupied, and it's on the top floor, the 7th floor, and you have a wonderful view out onto campus, and you can see the encampment. And this was the second to last week of classes, and as it's a really warm day, so all the windows are open. It was, I wouldn't say deafening, but really distracting. So we close all the windows, and then the teacher says, I love free speech. This is great. However, it's interrupting classes, and it's clearly a distraction. So we were able to do it, but it's
it was very hard.
It's hard, and it's not allowed in the way that if you're doing a protest, great, we want freedom of speech. However, it's interrupting classes. That's the freshman quad area. Students are trying to sleep, and this went on nonstop for over a week.
Do you think in retrospect you can look back to your freshman and sophomore year and see maybe that there were tea leaves of this, like that there were glimmers of this, that this was underneath the surface, or did this come all as a surprise to you and your friends?
I think it came as a surprise, but if I really think about it, I think that it's clear there. There already were student groups on campus that were either critical of Israel or planting the seeds of Colombia apartheid divest and BDS type campaigns. There was a resolution that was passed previously supporting BDS at Columbia. The president then, President Bollinger, struck it down, said we're not doing this. So there definitely were leaves, but I think Columbia in particular, in the admissions department, they want to see students that are activists, students that are engaged in local community, that may have more of a correlation of a tendency, that students that are going to join on to this type of thing.
And do you have friends who just missed out on their commencement? I mean, that they missed out. I mean, like commencement was canceled, wasn't it?
Yes.
So like you have obviously friends who are a year ahead of you. So describe what I'm sure you had conversations with them about this. Mm-hmm. I mean, and there was an article in the Times that this same group of students who lost their commencement from college also lost their commencement from high school because that was the COVID year. So I mean, can you share with us what some of your friends said about this?
I think a lot of my friends were so upset being at Columbia, being in a space where they felt so uncomfortable, feeling that there was a clear double standard, that their voices weren't being heard, that there was different enforcement policies, that they honestly, a lot of them didn't really feel like the commencement, they even wanted to partake in the commencement because they wanted to leave campus.
Oh.
And I also think a lot of students were unfortunately really nervous that if they had a full-fledged commencement, it would be kind of sabotaged, it would be destroyed or tainted in some way. A lot of families, you take your family, your grandparents, your friends, and then my cousin graduated from the School of Social Work, and instead of a large commencement, they had a class day. So it's just a smaller graduation of just that specific school. Typically, they have a significant commencement with all the schools together on campus, and it's at least maybe 50,000 people. I know it's 50,000, but it's really, really, really big. And at the School of Social Work, as some of the students protest, whether it was just wearing they were wearing keffiyehs, but a lot of them, she said about 20% had they duct taped their mouth, and then they also zip tied.
What was the symbolism of duct taping their mouth?
That they were being silenced, the administration. And then it was also, I think, police brutality, saying that they were the zip tied the police, because when the police arrest people, they zip tied to them.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a certain sadness that this, sort of milestone is then, robbed from someone after working so hard for 4 years. They don't get to experience that, and then even 4 years ago. So it's just, it is remarkable. And you were telling me on the phone, I want you to describe for everyone here, that this letter that was written in our name, that some of your friends helped to author and that you signed, where did that come from?
I think it came from a frustration of seeing that there were a lot of people.
Can you first describe, if you can just paraphrase for us what this letter, what the basic gist of the letter was? So
there was a letter that was published by 4 students, and I think 500, 700 Jewish students signed on to it. And essentially they were saying that overall, over this past few months, past 2 semesters, Columbia has become a focal point, or really one of the starting points of all these encampments nationwide, and especially heated. And instead of speaking to a lot of the students, unfortunately, there's been some bad actors, whether in good faith. There's been also some good faith actors that haven't necessarily been listening to the students' lived experience. So it was going on to talk about connecting. One of the big points is that you can be we're pro-Jewish, but we're anti-Zionist. And breaking that disconnect and saying, most Jews are supportive of Zionism, Judaism and Israel are linked, and you can't separate the two. And they basically was a call to listen to the students. I think it was done incredibly well, and there's a paragraph from it that I would love to read.
You want to read the paragraph?
I'd love to read it.
Yeah.
Okay. Our love for Israel does not necessitate blind political conformity. It's quite the opposite. For many of us, it is our deep love for and commitment to Israel that pushes us to object when its government acts in ways we find problematic. Israeli political disagreement is inherently a Zionist activity. Look no further than the protests against Netanyahu's judicial reforms from New York to Tel Aviv. To understand what it means to fight for Israel, to understand what it means to fight for the Israel we imagine. All it takes are a couple of coffee chats with us to realize that our visions for Israel differ dramatically from one another. Yet we all come from a place of love and an aspiration for a better future for Israelis and Palestinians alike.
Yeah, well said. It's a beautiful letter, and I will share the whole letter in the comments online. But it was also saying, I also took it to mean like other people are speaking for me, and we're the students here, and this other people are saying what I should think or what should happen here on my campus. And we want to take charge of what's happening on my campus. That's how I took it as well. Is that inaccurate?
No, I think so. Looking at the past 2-3 weeks, there's been tons of government officials that have visited campus. We had Hochul and Speaker Johnson, and the mayor and the president of the borough. But I think it's especially, something that was disappointing was before the Columbia administration said anything, Biden commented on everything that was going on at Columbia and regarding the encampment.
Why was that disappointing?
Why was it disappointing? Because it didn't feel like the administration was actively there and listening, and they were really slow to do anything.
You're the school administration?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So it took them about 3-4 days after the second encampment came up to really comment and do anything. Felt like a lack of transparency.
It must be a rather uncomfortable feeling to feel like the eyes of the world and the nation are in effect on what's happening in your home and your college campus.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if I told you this, but when I was traveling in January, I was going through Israeli security flying from Madrid to Tel Aviv, and the Israeli security guard said to me, she said, "Oh, you're from the United States. We're watching what's happening on the college campus." I'm like, "What? So aren't you going to ask me what I'm carrying?" And so it's people, and that's uncomfortable.
I had a similar story where I had a friend, and he was telling me that he has friends in Gaza fighting, and he said, "We're praying for you. We hope you're okay at Columbia. We hear it's crazy." This is a true story. It's like 3 people, similar things in Israel. They're getting rockets, and these guys are like, "I hope you're okay." Like, yeah, don't go clap. It's ridiculous.
Well, so did you ever feel so threatened?
I clearly felt like there were people who were looking for a fight. They were like egging people on, and then I tried to avoid it. So there was clearly the threat of like a physical confrontation. I never experienced that personally. Yeah.
Are you wearing your kippah more now because of this, or less?
No, I think I've been wearing it more. I don't normally wear it unless it's on Shabbat. I wear it more, whether it's the kippah or my Magen David or I'm wearing the hostage tags. I think that the Jewish community, I didn't think of this at the time. Colombia is about 20% Jewish. And I didn't realize it. I wanted to be close to home. It was a good school. I've come to appreciate the Jewish community so significantly.
What in particular?
What in particular?
Like you're talking about the Colombia
Jewish community.
Yeah.
It's a really strong community, but I failed to realize that on October 7th, I felt incredibly alone. I felt like my non-Jewish peers didn't really understand what we were feeling, didn't understand what it means to have family in Israel or a connection to Israel, what Israel means to us. And I still feel like I have a hard time communicating, and most people that aren't Jewish, don't really understand what Israel is, they still don't fully understand. So I think having a community and having some of my best friends in that community has been really meaningful.
You said to me there was a moving experience also that you shared, like where the Jewish community got together soon after October 7th. And you said that was very, very powerful. Do you want to describe that for us?
Yeah, it was on the main steps of Low. So Low is directly on campus. And we had about 500 people come. And this was right, I think this was October 10th. So we had the entire community come together. I think at the time Manoush came there, the president, and it was the entire community singing together. There was countless, I think it was candles, and it was spelling out, it was a Jewish star, and I think they also had a chai. It was just a beautiful moment of the community coming together.
Wow. Before I open it up for some questions from those who have joined us here in person, have there been any, like you described this professor who was participating, has there been any repercussions or any, what's happened to the professors who have said what I think are anti-Semitic things? Is there anything happening?
So I know this professor, Joseph Mossad, he was mentioned multiple times at the hearing at Congress. I don't know, I think he's lost his, he was a chair of a larger committee. I think he lost it, but I'm really not sure. I think it's more interesting looking at what is the role of faculty right now at Columbia.
Yeah,
I think some of the faculty have been, they've been posting messages on their website or hanging flyers saying we support Palestine, calling for a ceasefire from the river to the sea. And
those are two very different things, though,
yes.
right?
Yes.
I think it's like if someone, I may disagree, but if someone says that they support a ceasefire, they support Palestinian rights, that's different than saying from the river to the sea.
Mm-hmm. It's not all faculty. There are definitely a few faculties, different instances, but I'll be walking through a building, they'll see it on a bulletin board, a locked bulletin board.
What do you mean a lock?
It's not just like a thumbtack, it's like behind a piece of glass, like a thumbtack there.
Okay.
So there definitely are faculty who are engaging with it. I don't know what the split is, how many of them are calling for a ceasefire versus how many are saying from the river to the sea.
Yeah, but those are to my mind, those are vastly different things. So one really is talking about the elimination of Israel, and one's talking about that this current policy in war they disagree with. And those I think we need to be, I just want us to be aware of the differences between the two, because I'm not sure, as you call them, the outside actors always portray them as different, and I think that makes our college student friends' lives more difficult, that there's not this parsing of the differences. So, did you want to respond at all to that?
No, I just think it's concerning that there's such a large percentage of the faculty that are supporting. I think that there's two things. I think that once the police were called on the campus, it changed the dynamic. I think that a lot of the students then who weren't necessarily really involved in being pro-Israel or being pro-Palestinian, supporting the encampment, then they were galvanized, and then once students were arrested, then the faculty really said, we don't want police on our campus, and I don't know if it's a majority of the faculty, but they are very involved now. So I think that's concerning.
Yeah, we didn't talk about this, but one piece of that letter that was also very powerful was that the students who wrote the letter and who signed the letter, like yourself, seem to be saying we want to go back to the days of dialogue, because now we're living in this moment where you have to choose a side. You have to choose where you stand. And the two sides can't talk to each other anymore. And we want to go back to that, like sharing our differences and talking, because that's what colleges and universities is supposed to be about. That's how I took one of the themes of the letter, and I thought that was a very powerful piece. I don't know how we get back there, by the way. Do you have any sense of how we go back to that sort of former days, if you will?
I think it's really difficult to have a dialogue without a pre-existing relationship, without having mutual trust, having mutual understanding. I think that's going to be really hard to get back to. I think a big thing is mutual respect, of acknowledging, but I really hope next year there can be more productive dialogues.
How would you how would you construct that if you were able to construct such a dialogue? I mean, let's just dream for a second and take us out of this moment. Is it possible to create, an environment again where we can have that dialogue, where you can sit with a fellow college student who you adamantly disagree with, and not be screaming or hurling, anti-Semitism at one another?
No, I think we can definitely do it. I don't think I have necessarily the answers to it. I think
you're building 3D printers in space. You can come up with this. Come on. I mean, that seems simple. So.
Yeah. I don't know. I think inviting them to Shabbat dinner, great starting point.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do. Look, what you said, I want to affirm something you said. You can't have difficult conversations if you don't have a friendship. You start first with friendship and relationship, as you said. If you just have, I would suggest, if you just have a dinner, an ordinary dinner, first, almost before you have a Shabbat dinner, and then once you have that friendship and that relationship, then you can get to the tough stuff. Yeah. And you have enough things in a sense that you agree with each other that you can then have these profound disagreements. That we're just not even at the going out on a date stage yet. That is the problem. We can't even go out for just a casual anything.
I think it's finding points of mutual understanding and agreement, shared values, and building the bridge.
Right. Okay. All right. Well said. I want to give people an opportunity to ask questions for those who've gathered here and come in person. I'm going to ask you to, since we do have a lot of people who are joining us online, you see the microphone? So if you have a question, if you could walk to the microphone to ask your question. Go.
First of all, Quentin, I want to thank you very much for coming here tonight to speak with us. It's very, very important. You have to go back to school in September.
Yes.
What are your fears? Do you have any fears or trepidations about that, or concerns about going back to school again?
I think I have fears surrounding my classmates that have been really, really active in stuff that I would consider anti-Semitic. So I don't necessarily want to be sitting next to them, or it's really hard if we're put in a group together and I know that these people are calling for the destruction of Israel.
In other words, there's people who are, in your mechanical engineering classes,
exactly,
who were at the encampment.
Yeah.
And you're going to be in the same class together next year.
And unfortunately, it's not a small minority. So there's quite a few.
In your major in particular?
In my major, but also just I think the larger university larger student body was quite active. It was fairly sizable. So I think that's the largest thing of how do I broach that conversation. If I know someone is really active or they feel really strongly, and I've done it a few times and a few friends have done it, and they kind of just refuse to have a dialogue. They refuse to really speak about it. So I hope that once things simmer down, and if I'm put in that situation, I think it may be better to actively, get ahead of it, even if we're not in a group situation, just to have a sit down with them.
Do you have a fear about going back at all?
I have a fear of going back at all.
Are you talking about physical fear? Like, are you afraid?
Yeah, physical and mental, and
It's still a bit too fresh. I don't know. Over the summer, once I think about leaving campus, I think I'm nervous. I think I'm nervous to see will there be the same type of escalation. I don't think I'm fearful necessarily.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
One piece that just informs that is we don't know what the situation in Israel is going to be in September. Yeah. So if we're in the current state right now, I would have different worries than if there is actually a ceasefire. that may help to calm things down. I mean, there are things way outside of our control in terms of how it's going to be at Columbia. Wait till you get the microphone, Rabbi Moskowitz.
I'm not saying a word yet.
Okay.
Hi. So thank you. This was beautiful, and I appreciate your honesty. A year ago, did you have friends that were Muslim, or is it that you personally, and then in general, like, do Jewish kids hang out with Jewish kids, and Asian kids hang out with Asian kids, and Muslim kids hang out with each other? Like, were some of your friends, not your Jewish friends, your other friends, in the encampments?
So I don't have any friends that are really close to me that are Muslim. So I have one friend who doesn't go to Columbia who is, and we've had a hard time talking about it. We've kind of intentionally.
Is he a friend from high school? Or
He's a friend from high school.
Okay.
So from there, we've kind of intentionally said, oh, this is kind of crazy, it's really heated, but we've almost intentionally not spoke about it. It's something that I feel like I'm putting off, but I need to do.
Mm-hmm. It's hard.
Sorry, Rabbi Moskowitz.
Yes. Yes, Rabbi Moskowitz.
Yes.
What? I have another question, but go ahead.
Welcome to our house. Okay, so when you say you're going to be proactive, what are you going to actually do? I mean, what are you thinking to your head? How am I going to get ahead of this?
From the friend's perspective?
Yeah.
I think finding a time where we can have a degree of mutual understanding and be really, from cool-headed, not approaching it from like an emotional perspective, but finding common grounds, thinking about, I really empathize with everything that's going on, and I recognize that it's horrible, and I feel for everyone going in Gaza, and I recognize the atrocities that have led us to this situation. I'll have to report back on how it ultimately ends up going.
I think it's very noble. There's a lot of work to be done. I'm sorry to. Thank you.
Did you personally feel, prior to Hamilton Hall being invaded, or whatever the right word is, did you feel physically unsafe? Like, did you agree with Rabbi Buchler that Jews shouldn't be on campus, that it was safer for them not to be on campus?
I think it was a Saturday right afterwards. So he sent that on a Sunday after Shabbat. I think that's where everything changed, because that's when, there was a lot of death threats. There were, it was outside agitators, and someone was assaulted. So I think that really changed. And I think, unfortunately to say, if you were visibly, Jewish identifying, that made it much more of an easy target and much more identifiable. And I think it was unfortunate that night in particular, there was very little public safety. And the police weren't doing anything. One of my friends, he went to public safety. He said, hey, this happened. He said, will you walk? I'm with a group of 5 people. Will you walk with us to our dorm? Or I think we were living off campus. Mm-hmm. And they said no. And then he went to the police, and they said, okay, we'll walk you like a block. So they didn't feel safe. They didn't feel like the administration was doing anything. And I think the rabbi said the correct thing. It's unfortunate to say that Columbia isn't protecting us. So if you're home for Passover, stay home.
So how far off campus do you live?
So I live directly on campus.
Oh, so you live in one of those buildings you were allowed to stay in?
Yeah, so I was allowed to stay in campus, but it was a ghost town. It was me and the freshmen that were still on campus, because most of the freshmen were there. But all the buildings were closed, all the libraries was closed, so I was able to go out. They had one entrance, so you had to walk all the way around to go on to Broadway and get food, and then you just go back to your room, but I came back home early.
Right, so the library was closed?
Yeah, so the libraries were closed. Most of the dining halls, if you were living off campus, they had one dining hall that you can go to for the entire student body.
Wow.
Yeah. I think the other point I wanted to mention that I thought of the question was, I think part of the reason I'm putting off speaking to my Muslim friend is I'm really scared that if I do it poorly, I'm going to lose the friendship. And that's I feel like the worst case scenario. But.
Yeah, that is a profound fear. I mean, like, friends should be able to, disagree and, vehemently disagree and still maintain the friendship. But we're at a point just in general where you have to pick sides on everything. That you can't sit at a table anymore with someone who you profoundly disagree with. And I think that's not just what's happened at Columbia, the last several months. That's something that's been going on in our country for some time now.
Yeah.
And I really don't know how we recover that. Other questions? So just if you can kind of go up to the microphone. Oh, Grandpa.
It's a tough one.
Yeah, so, good luck, Quentin.
Quentin, by the way, Quentin is my grandson.
Yeah.
Question is this, Quentin, what would you tell a parent and their son who's graduating high school next year? Would you tell them to look elsewhere if they were considering Columbia as their first choice?
I
This
think
is your sister. Okay, go ahead. So,
that's a really tough question. I was at a listening session, and one of the moderators, who was the professor, she was talking about, they brought up the idea of, was the task force created to genuinely, positively impact the community? Is President Shafiq actually going to listen to their recommendations? The task force doesn't have any enforcement. It's really just listen, report, give recommendations. And I think it's important that you can either choose to work to reform from within, that you can sit at the table, don't give your seat up. So I think that while Columbia has been an incredibly difficult place, I think there's still potential, and I think that most of the students should still continue to go to Columbia, and I think it's a great university with a lot of resources. So I would still try to. I would still go. Yeah.
Thank you.
be quite dispiriting if our college student lost hope. Robin, can you?
So thank you again. Really very thoughtful. I was wondering about the Jewish students who joined the protest. Did you know any of them, and how do you feel about where they're coming from? Do you know where they're coming from, what they're thinking?
I know one of them not too well. I think that I was really surprised by a lot of them, but I think also for some of them, it was just calling for a ceasefire, and I think that a lot of them did a better job of capturing the detail of saying, okay, we're not looking for a river to the sea, but we're empathizing. I haven't had a lot of discussions with them, so I'm not sure I'm the best person to speak on it. But I think I understand where they're coming from. I just don't necessarily agree with the degree of if they're calling for, or if they recognize what they're calling for, of really adding from the river to the sea. I think a lot of them are saying, okay, we're saying this and we want to contextualize saying from the river to the sea, but we're not calling for the full destruction of Israel. I don't think you can add that caveat at the end.
Didn't you tell me that there was, some people describe those Jewish students as traitors, and what they were saying is treasonous, and that was part of what was the letter was trying to kind of draw a wider circle around people.
Yeah. So I think the letter used the word tokenizing.
Yeah.
Saying that while there are students, I think the biggest one is Jewish Voice for Peace. And I don't know, I think that they're mostly Jewish students, that they aren't representing the overall majority of American Jewry. But I wouldn't want to say they're any less Jewish or more Jewish because they hold these different views. Yeah.
Jen? What amazing participation.
What are your thoughts on social media? And how do you feel that social media has played a role in what's happening? You're a young person, smart. What do you think?
So I'm mostly not on social media.
Okay.
I think the biggest takeaway.
Good boy.
I think the biggest takeaway is that Israel and I think like American Jewry and worldwide Jewry has done a horrible job of marketing itself. I think that when you're able to see an infographic and you're just able to, whether you're looking at casualties, regardless of how accurate the figures are, I think it's really easy if you aren't particularly informed, you're not really following closely, to just look at X and assume Y. So I think social media, unfortunately, has added a lot of gas to the fire and inflamed lots of tensions and made it really easy to communicate different ideas. I think something that JVP and all this different organizations on campus have done a great job of doing is saying, whatever our challenge is, it's our collective we're collectively facing it. So they've done a great job of building coalitions with the union, looking at BLM, looking at police brutality, and saying these are all our struggles together and equating them to the same thing. So,
Thank you.
Yeah. Social media doesn't seem to help in general. Any other questions from those who have gathered here in person? All right, Quentin, I'd like to ask you to conclude for us with what more can we do? We're not in college. We're your congregation. We're your family. What can people do on the outside to help and be supportive?
I think there are a few big things. I think if you are, a donor to some of these universities, probably reassess your funding status. Maybe if you're friends with the deans or any of the trustees, talk to them. And I think that applies.
Well, what would you say to them if you're talking to them?
I would say you need to make sure all students, not just Jewish students, are safe on campus. I think whenever their free speech is turning to hate speech, that can't be allowed. And they need to swiftly make sure that you're not just bluffing, but you're actually going to do something about it. I think that's a big thing.
Your biggest problem with the university was that moving of the line, of saying you can, if you're not out by this day, we're going to do something, then not following through, and not holding everyone to the rules that they had set.
I think that was a major one. But just clear enforcement of policies across the board.
Right. Okay. To be even-handed. Yeah. So what else can we do?
I think another thing is educating. I didn't go to the Door Hebrew School, but just educating.
You didn't have to say that out loud.
No, I didn't. Well, I don't know. But I think educating more so, and just making sure everyone understands the history, understanding that Israel is the ancestral homeland, and really thinking about not getting your information from simple social media infographics, but really knowing everything that's going on, looking at the history. So,
look, one of the fundamental problems we have as, in liberal synagogue life is that our students are in religious school by and large from 3rd through 7th grade, and the focus is on preparation for bar and bat mitzvah. And so it's you can't getting into this complicated subject, which I do a little bit with the 7th graders, is, an enormous task.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult. I'm not trying to make excuses, but I think that is the fundamental problem, that most people stop their religious school education and their Jewish education at 7th grade when you can actually get into this tough stuff and start parsing it and really discussing and debating. And so then you're thrown into college, and one feels a bit ill-informed and uninformed. And so that's a struggle.
And I think the last point is continuing to support Israel. I can't tell you how excited I was. I was walking back from my dorm, and I saw outside of the Columbia Gates, it was a pro-Israel rally. I saw all these flags, and it was so invigorating to see. It was probably 1 to 10. So if you're in a position to go out and support Israel, whatever it means that may be, I urge you to do so.
Thank you. That was well said. Thank you to Quentin Baumann. Thank you again for coming and sharing your wisdom and sharing your firsthand experience and teaching us about what you've learned and what more we can do. And thank you to everyone for attending, both in person and online.
For sure.
Quentin, well done.
Thank you.